3 hollow man sightings in national parks that were never explained. The first thing you should know is that the woods don't go silent when something is wrong. They get selective. The wind keeps talking to the pines, the creek keeps repeating itself, the crickets go on drumming, but the sounds you need most fall away like a dropped radio into a ravine. You call a name and the valley folds your voice into its seams. You swear you hear footsteps, and it's only your pulse trying on a different pair of boots. People say national parks are safe because they are protected. The rangers will tell you that protection is mostly a line on a map and a handful of rules. Everything else belongs to the dark. Story 1. They warned me about the trail before I earned my first patch. It wasn't on the map in the visitor center. Just a maintenance spur the crew used to reach a string of old survey cairns and a weather sensor that hated winter. On my second week, a senior ranger named Alvarez told me the rule like he was reciting a prayer. We don't walk the ridgelands after sundown. He didn't say why. He just showed me how to check the last camera ping and how to close out a log without mentioning where I had really been. That evening, thunderheads marched in from the west and turned the late light the color of copper. A couple of day hikers were still out on the switchbacks, and I jogged up to swing them toward the trailhead. I might have made it back before the sky let go if I hadn't noticed a second set of boot prints pacing ours on the softer shoulder. Long strides, narrow heels, the toe of each print sharply pointed like the maker didn't like how feet were supposed to be. I kept this to myself, because rookie rangers should conserve their questions, but Alvarez must have seen my eyes tracking the ground when I clocked out. He repeated the rule, slower this time, as if rules could be thickened like soup. Night shifts in the park office are an education in the different ways humans invent emergencies. Lost keys, raccoons with opinions, another raccoon inside a car by way of an open sunroof, and once a man who swore a coyote had picked his pocket. The storm drowned the radio for an hour, and in the hush behind the static I heard the maintenance cam on Ridgelands cough up 3 rapid stills. I brought them onto my screen, expecting wind-shaken branches and water on the lens. The first image showed the sensor pole and the slick backs of wet firs bowing toward it. The second showed the same, except the trees closer together, as if the forest had taken a step. The third wasn't trees. It was a figure where there hadn't been a figure. Tall, angle-thin, its head bowed like it was listening for something underground. I told myself there was a lens flare, and that the flare had found itself an outline. I told myself to get Alvarez. He wasn't in the kitchen, and his truck wasn't in the slot. The rain quit as fast as it started, and the power came back with a rattled little cheer from the vending machine. Another ping arrived, no photo attached. A motion alert. The camera sometimes did that when fog breathed across the ridge, but the air outside was clear and suddenly colder, like weather ducking under a door. No one sends a rookie to break a rule, but rookies break their own to prove they don't have to be sent. I drove past the sign that said service only, then parked at the second bend because the gravel was slick with needles and I didn't want to explain a dent to paperwork. My headlamp spun the rain in hard white lines along the trail, and the smell of ozone wore off into that sour green smell you get where moss is winning. In the weeds to my left, there were the boot prints again, longer than mine, pointed like they had been stitched. They didn't waver or weave. They walked a straight rope through the switchbacks, matching me but keeping to the soft edges. At the sensor clearing, I found the pole still humming and the lens still blinking, and I felt instant relief so bright it made me laugh. I didn't hear Alvarez step out of the trees because he didn't. He just spoke from where the dark was, saying my name as if he had misplaced it and wanted to borrow mine a while. I swung my light toward the voice and pinned, not Alvarez. It was the wet outline I had seen in the third still, only now it was making the forest look like a picture behind glass. No face, only a shape where a face should have been. No hands, only sleeves that ended too soon. Some people say fear shortens distance. For me, it stretched it. The clearing became a long hallway, the pole a doorframe, the path a runner laid down for guests you didn't want to meet. The figure did not move. The trees beside it leaned again by a breath, like the whole stand was trying discreetly to get away without admitting it. My radio hissed, and Alvarez's real voice slipped in, low and flat, telling me to stand where I was and not to speak. He sounded like you do when a deer has noticed you and any word will break the spell. I obeyed. The figure tilted its head, listening again for the wrong thing. Then it stepped back into the trees without bending a branch, and the clearing was only a clearing again. Alvarez found me with my light on my boots. He didn't ask what I saw. He didn't have to. He pointed his chin at the far edge of the clearing where the moss looked ironed and the needles lay in a shallow arc, a perfect crescent that had not been there before. He makes doorways, Alvarez said in a voice used for injuries. And once you know where a doorway is, you start seeing them wherever dusk is folding. He put his hand on the sensor pole not to steady himself, but to steady the metal, like it might try to walk away after what it had witnessed. We never wrote that night down. The camera maintenance log read routine check. The storm made a good excuse. I stopped using the ridge lance as a shortcut, day or night, not because of the rule, but because rules only exist where something has pressed them into shape. When new rangers asked, I gave them Alvarez's sentence and nothing else. The next spring, a hiker brought in a photo of the same clearing at noon. No figure, just the same crescent in the needles, a little deeper, as if someone had opened the door again to check whether we were still on the other side. Stories like this have been submitted by viewers who claim the Hollow Man followed them. If anything strange has happened to you, leave it in the comments. Story 2. We picked a campsite with a view of the lake and a stand of silvered deadwood that looked romantic in the late afternoon. By midnight, the snags had turned into a cathedral of fingers pointing at a moon with opinions. I was there with my sister and her girlfriend, and we were early for leaf season, which meant the campground was half empty and the ranger talk about safe food storage had the rhythm of a church whose choir didn't show. We ate too much, told the old family story about the bear that turned out to be a shirt on a stump, and sealed the cooler with a strap like we were belting a suitcase that didn't believe in zippers. Sometime after 1, the sudden stillness woke me. Not silence, stillness. The wind had put its hand on the lake and held it steady. My ears filled the pause with footfalls that didn't happen. Then something changed in the quality of the dark, like a curtain had been drawn around our tent and tied off with twine. I unzipped a triangle and peered out. At first I registered nothing but the ash-pale gravestones of dead trunks and the angular black of the pines. Then my eye caught the ground, and the ground caught me. We were circled. Rocks, fist-sized, lay gently around our tent in a ring about 2 strides out. Not thrown, not kicked, placed. Each stone's flattest face was turned inward, and between stones there were prints. They were not boot prints. They were the suggestion of steps made by something that disliked weight. Deep at the heel, somehow absent at the ball, pointed at the toe. The ring wasn't perfect where the roots muscled up, but the care taken to go around them made my mouth dry. I woke the others with the wrong voice that people use when they want to be calm and end up instructing the air. We argued about animals, pranksters, kids with nothing but time, and then we counted the occupied sites on the loop and realized the only light came from a bathroom house humming like a refrigerator. My sister wanted to break the circle to prove it didn't mean anything. Her girlfriend wanted to leave it to see if something would admit to making it. I wanted to pretend I hadn't seen it and sleep, which is another way of asking the night to finish its part without you. We compromised with the oldest rule in camping. If you can't explain it, at least tell it you see it. We kept our headlamps off and watched. The ring held. It was strange how much comfort a 30-inch ribbon of cleared ground can provide. Beyond the stones, the forest kept its own counsel. Sighs of water against shore, beetles with tiny iron feet, a distant owl practicing the same sentence. After a while, the moon drifted into the scrim of a cloud, and the snags softened into silhouettes. I almost forgot the shape at the far side of the ring because it didn't announce itself or approach. It simply declared a corner where there wasn't one. A figure stood just outside the circle, tall and slack, like a coat hung on the frame of a door you didn't build. If it had stepped forward, maybe I could have shouted and broken the spell of it. Instead, it measured the ring with a patient tilt of the head, and the head had nothing on it that could reflect our light even if we had used any. It was studying the stones the way a person studies a lock they have opened many times, curious why it should be closed tonight. The trees leaned a hair, as if sharing weight with one another in a crowded pew. My sister squeezed my shoulder until the pain felt like a separate presence that I could focus on instead of the outline. We did nothing. That felt like the instruction the dark had been writing for us all along. In that nothing, the figure reached up as though to touch a branch, and the branch bent early, anticipating fingers that had not arrived. It could have been wind. It could have been the branch remembering a previous hand. The figure turned the smallest degree, an angle rather than a motion, and in that angle the circle around our tent made a different kind of sense. It wasn't meant to keep it out. It was meant to keep us from walking to meet it, the way a parent stops a child at the curb with an arm they forget they have. I don't remember sleep beginning. I remember morning arriving with the sound of a crow that had news for everyone, and the light was ordinary and sifting through a yellowing canopy, and people were starting cars like they were shaking off dreams. The rocks remained where they had been, their flat faces still turned toward us. The prints were deeper in daylight, as if something heavier came later to check the work. When we stepped out, we avoided the stones on instinct, looping between them like the ring was a fence. Only after the coffee boiled did we decide to break it, and even then we did it with a boot, not a hand. At the bulletin board near the camp host's site, we found the usual warnings about bears and stoves and quiet hours. Someone had thumbtacked a piece of lined paper under the map and written in a rushed block hand, "Do not camp in a circle someone else made." The host had initialed it like any rule. We asked quietly whether she had put the note up this morning. She looked at us and then at the line of pines beyond our shoulders and said the paper was old. She replaced it once a month when the rain tired it out. Her mouth began a story and then closed. She told us to pack food tight and not leave shoes outside the tent where something could step into them and get ideas. We left by the scenic road and pretended to argue about where to stop for pie. That night back home, the shadow the lamp threw against the wall looked like a ring drawn around our couch, and for a long time I sat with my toes inside the imaginary line, certain that to cross it would be a kind of yes I wasn't ready to speak. If you're still watching, you're not alone. Most people turn this off by now, but you want to see what happens next. Maybe you should stick around, or subscribe, before it gets worse. Story 3. The missing boy was 6 and had a way of drawing with his entire body. He leaned into crayons like they were levers, shoulders tight, tongue peeking out, every line a small shove against the page. His mother brought the picture to the ranger desk before she admitted he was missing. She said he had drawn a man they kept seeing between the aspens, tall, almost funny tall, with no face. In the drawing, the man's body was a doorway with sleeves. It was one of those clean blue mornings when the mountains look near enough to wear. Families braided the trail by the creek. The boy's parents were the careful kind. The dad counted heads the way a conductor taps a rail, and the mom pointed out cloud shapes to keep the walk from becoming the kind of project that made everyone mutinous. They reached the first footbridge, paused for a photo, and then the river's talk got louder for a minute and the boy was on the other side of the louder and no longer next to anybody. We locked the trail fast, but the woods don't understand tape as a boundary. I joined the grid search with a loop of pink flagging in one pocket and the boy's drawing folded in the other where it kept reminding my hip it existed. You know how these days go. Calls, whistles, the hum of drones, good dogs with better noses, and every 20 minutes someone insisting they heard a laugh that turned out to be a Jay rehearsing a complaint. The parents stayed at the trailhead telling each arriving volunteer the story about the drawing as if they could get it to end differently by getting the words just right. Around 2, the search captain dispatched me and another ranger, Mears, to check a side corridor the map still marked as an unmaintained route. That's bureaucratic, for you can't get lost on it if you never find it. The corridor curved into a narrower light, and the ground changed from duff to fine mica and grit, a surface that offered up footprints like a confession. We found the boys, short and sure, and then after a dozen strides they began to split, a tiny divergence in the gait of a child beginning to skip. Beside those prints were others that were not ours and not the boys', longer and set closer together than a body that needed to breathe would choose. We came to a place where the corridor narrowed to 2 leaning rocks, and even before I saw it there, the fold in my pocket warned me. The drawing lay on the grit just past the pinch, creased, foot scuffed. The crayon lines ground faintly brighter by the pressure. But the picture wasn't the same. The doorway that was a body now had a little square drawn inside it, like a window inside a blank. And in that square, the boy had scribbled a smaller figure colored the same blue as the crayon used for the sky. He had made himself a window in the man. Mears radioed it in, and then chose a complicated silence while the captain spoke back. They told us to mark and continue. The rocks leaned closer, and we turned sideways to slip through. On the other side, the air felt like a church stairwell, cooler than it had any right to be, smelling of old paper and a bench where someone had waited too long. The prints deepened, as if the ground there remembered more. We called the boy's name and used all the coaxing a voice has, promising the ordinary: snacks, a ride in the ranger truck, the chance to tell the story first. The corridor ended in a small open flat where the trees decided, without consulting the mapmaker, to give each other space. In the exact center of the flat, the needles had been cleared in a wide rectangle, whose corners were rounded in the way a child rounds corners when they are learning to draw houses. On the far edge, a taller rectangle stood among the trunks. It was only shadow at first, a shadow that had nowhere to be cast from, tilted a few degrees as if listening. I had the feeling you get when you are about to apologize to a stranger for bumping into them, except I hadn't moved and no one had touched me. I don't remember the exact sequence of breathing that followed. The shape did not come forward. It widened without moving, the way a hallway in a dream turns into a room when you remember that it can. There was nothing like a face, nothing like a mouth, but the sense of reading a posture was as clear as if I had been watching a choir director raise a hand. Mears put her fist at her hip, a sign that meant, wait, and in that waiting I saw the rectangle of cleared ground for what it was, an invitation of a very old kind. Someone had placed the idea of a door on the floor and was waiting to see if anyone would step into its outline. The radio crackled again with distant voices entering a new kind of careful. They knew from our silence that we were looking at something we didn't have the words for. I kept one hand on the folded drawing to convince myself it was physical. The paper felt warm through the thigh of my uniform. The figure tilted. A breeze moved through the flat then, setting all the needles talking at once. And in that noise I heard, ridiculously clearly, the sound of a child's breath catching in the way a body does when it is about to accept the rules of a game it didn't want to play. I stepped one foot into the rectangle because I am not always the person I hope I will be under pressure. Mears grabbed my pack and yanked me bodily back with a protective anger that tasted like iron. The air in the open flat changed by a degree you could measure, warmer now, or rather less like church. The figure diminished back into an ordinary tall shadow that a tree might cast if it had decided to bend light into strange arithmetic. Mears said my name, and then a word I won't repeat, and then said it softer like a prayer. We waited until the feeling of company retreated to the place behind the trunks where all guests go when they are finished being seen. We did not find the boy. That is the part you already know from the way these stories are told. A week later, in a mile down creek, a volunteer clearing a blowdown found a second drawing caught in the roots where the runoff had trapped spring's trash. The crayon lines were smeared by water, but you could still make out the doorway body and the little blue square inside it, only now the blue had been colored over in gray. Beneath the picture, written the way children write when they have learned what letters are, but not yet whom they can hurt with them, was one sentence. It's not a room, it's a hall. Every year since, someone leaves a new box of crayons at the trailhead, and the box is always short the blue, and the Park Service considers that theft and replaces the box anyway. I still have the first drawing in a file that doesn't exist according to the log. Sometimes I take it out, and the doorway looks bigger than before, which doesn't make sense because paper doesn't do that. I try not to look past it in my house at night, because what waits behind you loves a frame. New horror drops every Hollow Wednesday. Subscribe before he finds someone else.